Hello, and today's webinar, Show the Synergies, the S2P Suite Story. I'm Vice President Corporate Development at Zycus, and we've developed this content specifically for Zycus customers. And it's extremely appropriate that I'm joined by Zycus Chief Customer Officer Greg Marr. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
We wanted to tackle this topic, show the synergies, the S2P Suite Story, to really examine the value of a graded approach to source to pay, both from a market perspective as well as from what our customers are telling us they're realizing in terms of an integrated approach to source to pay. So to do that, I'll just overview our agenda briefly. I'll kick us off with more of the market perspective, the best-in-class organizations realizing in the integrated source to pay, and what is the real value of that approach? Now, clearly, there's some obvious benefits of amplifying the relationship with the technology vendor, for one thing, having one vendor instead of multiple different point solutions that you have to manage, and that can also, of course, simplify a lot of the back-end system management, integration, those kinds of issues. But today, we really want to focus more on what the incremental value from a return on investment, from a process efficiency standpoint, of integrated approach to source to pay. So I'll cover some of those areas, and Greg will take us through some specific customer case studies, some different approaches, but in both cases, utilizing an end-to-end integrated source to pay approach, and we'll really highlight how they've achieved a pretty rapid transformation across source to pay. We'll kind of look at what comes next. Once you've got a full automation of core sourcing and procurement processes, what are some of the next leading edge value-added approaches that can improve customer centricity, help procurement elevate its status within the business and promote the value that's delivered, and we'll kind of highlight in closing some of those emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, things, blockchain, all of these, and how they fit into the picture going forward. So without further ado, let's talk about what are the best-in-class organizations able to realize, and many of which are adopting this integrated source-to-pay approach. And here's a variety of benchmarks across sourcing and procurement that we've curated for you. And just to net it out, the bottom line is there's a wide chasm in what best-in-class organizations are able to realize in a very tangible, measurable way, and what the average performers or everyone else is sort of stuck with. Also, this big disparity where best-in-class are getting about a third more spend under management. They're able to source 20% more of that spend and yield, on average, at least an incremental percentage in savings. They're able to obtain more of those savings, too. So typically 15% more of their total spend that's compliant to contract. In terms of efficiencies, their cycle times are reduced by up to 50%, and for their transactional costs, things like cost per PO or per invoice, by a factor of 2-4x. So some real gains being realized by best-in-class organizations. There's so a strong correlation between their performance and their use of advanced technology. So best-in-class organizations, as shown from this data, and partners are much more likely to have adopted at least core sourcing and procurement capabilities. So the majority of best-in-class have deployed e-sourcing, contract management, e-procurement, and supplier networks, for example. This is from a survey that the Hackett Group did that really looked at what roadmap organizations are planning when it comes to how to address source to pay. Now, clearly, there's still a significant percentage that are either satisfied with or simply having to make do with what the ERP provider can for their case, but there's a significant trend in the market towards this idea of consolidating source-to-pay applications around a single integrated platform provider. So whereas just 10% have already deployed a source-to-pay platform today, an additional 21% say that's what they have in their future ahead. So with that in mind, a clear trend towards an integrated platform for source-to-pay, it's worth kind of thinking about what's a full source-to-pay suite, what are some of the use cases, and what is the incremental value or benefit. So that's actually what I'd like to tackle first. This idea of the fact that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, that by having an integrated suite approach as opposed to point solutions, some class organizations are extracting an incremental value. And this data from Ardent Partners is to highlight that gap, the performance benefit or dividend that organizations that are adopting integrated source-to-pay have realized. So it starts on the very front end by having spend analytics tightly coupled with the sourcing process. Are averaging incremental gains of 24 to 41%, higher savings per project. By then linking sourcing to contract management, e-procurement, and e-pulls processes, they realize those identified savings opportunities, so they close any compliance gap that made this by sourcing to the contracting process. That's been shown to reduce savings leakage by 38%. And the class organizations, 20% higher compliance rates when they get into the e-procurement, the operational aspect. Link the first P to the second P, procurement to payables, realized they can reduce invoice costs by up to 80%. So some tangible, measurable arguments out there that may be on path towards a transformational journey. Maybe you've implemented only certain point solutions and trying to develop a business case justification for why go forward with an integrated source-to-pay approach. Now, I want to real briefly about some of the key use cases where leverage exists, these synergies by having an integrated suite of modules across source-to-pay. So if we look at the process, and we've kind of bifurcated between the control layer on the top, the strategic and operational layer. So strategic procurement, operational procurement being the more transactional aspect of procure. I'll just walk through a couple of quick use cases. Now, first of all, there's the kind of planned strategic sourcing waves and having that type of proactive process where the spend analytics can provide the insights to identify the highest leverage, the highest savings opportunities, and flow that spend data into the sourcing process as well. Now, the value here is that there's also the unplanned or ad hoc sourcing process. That comes from having a front-end intake to the procurement process called request management. We'll talk about that in a little bit. As well as the other unplanned activities that can start the requisitioning phase in e-procurement. So not every position that's created is for an existing cataloged item or even contracted item. Sometimes those requisitions initiate that kind of unplanned or ad hoc sourcing process. So by linking these processes together, sourcing function can have a much more comprehensive view of all of the different types of projects that they need to initiate. Now, to do sourcing, that's informed significantly by having access to other information, such as current supplier performance. You'd want to look at the scorecard for your existing suppliers to determine which ones you'd want to invite to a sourcing event, for example. At the conclusion of a sourcing event, you want to be able to seamlessly transfer the pricing, the terms that have just been negotiated in the RFP process directly into the contracting process. So you're not rekeying data, you're not introducing latency into the process or potential for errors. The idea is enter data once, have it flow through the source-to-pay process as well. So, away here, modules feeding into the others. Being able to, when you initiate the contract, from that supplier profile. So you've got all the firmographic and contact information for those suppliers. You're able to go directly from the contract phase to the operational procurement phase. So taking the pull in the contract and actually populating an electronic catalog such that that information is available to users when they go to initiate a requisition. So really a number of different touch points. I won't try to cover them all, but some tangible use cases for where having that integrated flow of information can really accelerate the entire process cycle time and create greater efficiencies. Now, to bring the point home, I'd like to invite Greg in to walk us through a couple of what we'll call the suite stories, customers that have implemented the full integrated suite of source-to-pay and are realizing significant gains as a result. Greg?
Thank you. So let's kick off some of the cases that we have with our customers. Let me try to advance this slide here. There we go. So let's first start with Curtiss-Wright, a very interesting corporation, a publicly traded manufacturing company, who actually, if you understand the history of this company, this actually goes all the way back to the Wright brothers, and so to realize that it's in the automotive or the aerospace space, it's very common to think that, but also they've become much more expanding their footprint in terms of their go-to-market in sensors and various other valves and other industrial components. They're a company of about $2 billion in revenue. They have about 8,000 employees. They are very much a global corporation with 160+ locations worldwide, with a 9,000+ active supplier community. If we can move slide forward. On such a small percentage of the spend, and what they realized is that it was absorbing too much of their time, and as a result, there was a lot of inefficiencies in their overall process. And so what they were looking to do was very much so invert the Pareto principle and get to the point where they were going to spend their time on the more important A-level spend and try to automate through the use of procure-to-pay automation technologies that C-level spend going forward. So they took the following steps in the overall approach, and this very much so fits into what we talked about earlier in terms of a best practice approach. Step one is something that we see commonly, and it is not only recommended by us, it's also recommended by the partners' hand, and it is to first of all your external spend. You can know where you're spending your money. That involves the implementation of spend analysis and analytics solution, and then from that visibility into the spend that you have, you then create savings initiatives and projects that then introduce into your sourcing process and attack the market in terms of creating the sort of competitive sort of sourcing events that drives the cost that you're paying for your goods and services down. Then, of course, once you've established all of these, favorable contracts, that is potential savings, but you have to realize those savings. And to realize those savings, you have to have a strong compliance process in the area of your procurement operations. And that means the integration of your contract management system, your vendor management system, and of course your procure-to-pay system. Once that's in place, then of course, then you have to manage your customers or your suppliers in such a way that it is ensuring that everyone is adhering to the policies and performing to the extent that you want them to, you need them to. What that when they approached this project was to, is to approach it from a, Curtiss-Wright wants to be world-class. Because their direct spend is a much greater component of their spend than their indirect, they want to focus on direct spend world-class performance. And to do this, they of course wanted to leverage the spend analytics, and so that they could target those areas in their spend that they could achieve the fastest, largest returns. This involved the normalization of spend taxonomies. I think it was mentioned in an earlier slide. Curtiss-Wright has a large number of ERP systems, and therefore their accounts payable information is distributed across all of these systems. And what we did was to bring that all together, create a normalized taxonomy so that we could look at this spend in a normalized, harmonized way, and then be able to slice and dice it in such a way that we can identify savings areas through supplier consolidation, through taking the total spend of the organization to the market from a sourcing perspective, as well as looking other areas in which it makes sense in terms of even finding, suppliers that were providing you different prices across different geographies or different business units across the patch. And then, of course, the idea was to triage all this information and to prioritize various savings projects and go after those, in an aggressive way. Sourcing from an event savings perspective, they wanted to do was make sure that they were focusing once again on the 20% of the spend that was representing 80% of their cost. It turns out the direct indirect spend profile was 75-25, and what we wanted to do was make sure that they looked at looked at the market, found out what the peer performance was, look at world-class, and always target to be able to to achieve world-class performance from an organizational standpoint. And so when you look at what they did initially, and these are really, really impressive results. Once they had spend analyzed, they targeted a few areas that they thought they could find savings. And as you can see in the first auction for machine parts, they were able to actually negotiate a savings of nearly $2.5 million. And this is a strategy that we see time and time again. Spend through the analysis process, approach the market from a sourcing standpoint, and very, very quickly target low-hanging fruit in such a way that you achieve your business case and you fund the project going forward. It's something that we've seen a lot of. The second auction was equally impressive from a percent savings perspective, not as much from a dollar value perspective, but still a huge success in terms of moving this thing forward. Now, when it comes to the P2P challenge, obviously with multiple ERPs, you have a very, very distributed procurement function if you're using the ERP for procurement. In order to virtualize a group purchasing type of organization, they put in a pay suite through us, and what allowed is that all purchasing to be done in the same system, so the visibility and the single point of truth was there. It also allowed them to be able to become much more reactive in terms of PPV. Okay. You know, in a manufacturing, you kind of start with an idea of what the purchase price is going to be, but throughout the year, because of commodity price changes, et cetera, you start to see a variation, and this PPV can become very, very costly to an organization unless they have very, very close real-time sort of view on this. And so what we were looking to do here is create an environment in which they would see immediately the impact of any price variations into what they were purchasing, and they could then respond to that and react to that very, very quickly. Non-standard approvals, because without proper workflow that was structured and organized in such a way that had the necessary approvals, we saw that things were getting approved that shouldn't, that were affecting budgets in a negative sort of way, and so we needed to put in place the auditing and the compliance management systems that were going to ensure that we were going to be able to achieve the goals. One thing we talked about this, 80% of their time is being spent on C-level spend, so they wanted to automate that process all the way from the requisition to the payment in such a way that it was a one-touch type of operation. Volume of paper processes, we see this a lot even today. Although we've been talking about, e-procurement and e-commerce for quite some time, it still is surprising to see there is still a lot of paper, and there still are a lot of checks being cut, there's a lot of paper being produced, and just because you've moved to an email type of system instead of a form on a piece of paper, it's still an inefficient way to approach the sort of process. And so, email is not the same thing as an integrated process. So need to keep that in mind. And then, of course, all of these ERPs, the compliance issues were distributed throughout a lot of different areas, and what they were looking to do was to consolidate that into one place by putting out a global procurement system. So here we go. Transformational goals from procure to pay, better, faster, cheaper, i.e. they wanted to have a system that was easy to use, that was able to control the process from the beginning to the end. They wanted to have procurement, to be visualized as instead of a cost center, but rather high value adding component to the bottom line, and that's, I think, the goal of every purchasing organization, to be considered to be very much a contributor to the bottom line impact in the organization. They want to make sure that they were a value partner within the manufacturing arena, so that they were seen to be adding value there. And then, of course, they wanted to make sure that the system was easy to use, was automated and efficient, so that you saw a great reduction in what was the typical sort of work associated with a manual paper-based system. Contract management, obviously they needed to aggregate all their contracts into one place, a real problem for a global organization. And of course, they wanted to proactively monitor the metadata associated with the contract, particularly around the terms of the contract. They needed to be notified in advance, and in advance based upon the complexity of the contract negotiation. They wanted to make sure that they had a onboarding process that was streamlined for supplier management. When you have multiple ERPs, you have multiple vendor master files. They wanted to see that streamlined and much more consistent across the entire patch. And then, of course, they wanted to establish savings management systems. We have a module called iSave, in which you can create and track and monitor your savings initiatives across the company, so that it is auditable and is, of course, reportable throughout the organization. Okay, these were the project objectives to roll this out, and of course, it was achieved in a very, very short space of time, and I think has been very successful in terms of allowing the procurement organization to really, within a manufacturing context, to be a high value contributor to the overall performance of the company. Let me now move on to AmeriHealth, Caritas, which is a much different company than obviously Curtiss-Wright. What we're talking about is a healthcare, solutions provider, mainly within the Medicare, Medicaid sort of arena. they are national. They're across the country, providing a lot of different healthcare-related services into the income area. Once again, when you see some of the challenges that they faced, you see this, kind of a consistently across the board, high volume of paper processes, lack of trail, visibility, any sort of control from a business standpoint, lost savings due to non-compliance, in terms of not be able to guide the buying, communities through and to various negotiated suppliers, which would provide the highest value to the organization. Very, very limited visibility across their spend, and then a non-standard approval process, and little supplier collaboration going forward. Informational goals were simply to put in a single integrated source of platform. They saw that as to be very, very instrumental, and once the technology platform was in place, a lot of these other goals would be possible. A single version of the truth, once again, with a single integrated platform, it is easy to find bits of information throughout the organization, and bringing it all together into a single version of the truth is difficult. They want to obviously, achieve their business case objective, and it was just to bring 4% of addressable, kind of spend savings, and then, they wanted to, of course, deliver an enhanced user experience such that adoption would be not only much easier, but of course it would be very, very glad to see throughout the organization. Looks similar to what we saw at Curtiss-Wright. You've got two different companies with two different dramatic, businesses. You're approaching this project in a similar sort of way. Get the spend under control, know where you're spending your money, initiate the necessary sourcing agreements and processes in place that you can create the contracts that you can then, integrate with your procure pay, make sure you have compliant spending, and then, of course, managing your vendors to ensure that everything is being addressed and in such a way that you're having good vendor performance, and you also have good performance, and it's all in adherence with the contracts that you have in place. And then, of course, manage the supplier relationships in such a way that you have a positive relationship. It's very interesting the way that the payables can affect the supplier relationships, and it can also reflect the price, because obviously if you have trouble in processing invoices and payments become delayed, you start having a dissatisfaction within the supplier community, and it's something that you want to avoid going forward. If you at what Gartner is saying with regards to where they're seeing top performers, you're seeing that the top performers are looking at 95% of the spend being accurately classified and reported and refreshed on at least a quarterly basis. What we're seeing, which is very, very exciting at AmeriHealth, is that we're getting away from the concept of a quarterly refresh and looking at a real-time feed from procurement straight into the spend analysis product, and say that when you're capturing the GL codes appropriately at the requisition, and using the commodity scheme hierarchies such right at the demand stage, this flows very easily, and it facilitates the opportunity for real-time spend visibility. And when you have real-time spend visibility, of course, it allows you to react much more quickly. Any sort of compliance is when it comes to that. These, rather than setting up the complex matching part sourcing events, these guys were looking at some very, very quick wins using quick sourcing that allowed them to be able to go out and do what is like a 3-bid and a buy sort of approach, and that is checking and testing the price that has been established, in all cases. What they also were able to do was to be able to create potential suppliers basically on the fly, so that they could be very, very responsive and agile when it came to the supplier community in such a way that they weren't having to rely on a lengthy process of supplier approval before they would go out and get bids from them. Procure to pay, it was all about guided buying. Guided buying has a lot of different sort of connotations to a lot of people. Guided buying is viewed as having a very, very easy to use, almost, it almost walks you through the process and maintains the sort of compliance to the overall policies. I think it's also guided buying in terms of guiding the requisitioner through and to those suppliers and those products that are going to bring most value and the highest degree of savings and allow you to achieve the savings potential that you go there. Guided buying is now starting to take on an AI look and feel, because as we think about self-driving cars, we're also thinking about self-driving, if you will, business processes. A lot of areas within the procure source to pay application suite, and we're seeing a lot of AI being brought to the table in such a way that we can, further automate the processes in such a way that's driving even more value from a savings perspective into the organizations. Once again, contract management, supplier managed, savings management. When you have a integrated suite, all of this works together for the good of the eventual goal of producing the sort of savings that you want to see delivered through your organization. Health, very much so, focused on change management as it related to the deployment. You see this time and time again. Executive sponsorship is a must. You hear it, but you don't always see it in all projects. And in this case, this was not a procurement initiative. This was a corporate initiative. It was championed by the CPO, but it was very much so aligned with CEO and the CFO to ensure that everyone's objectives were aligned and the support was there from the top level within the organization. Key stakeholders like IT and finance and legal were involved, of course, from the very, very beginning. And never forget to bring IT to the table. A lot of times when you think of these cloud solutions, it's a way for procurement to be able to buy and to implement some technology without the involvement of IT. But IT is very much so a stakeholder in this, as is finance, and therefore it's important from a change management standpoint to have all these stakeholders at the table being involved and participating in the end result of this project. And what's very, very interesting is that, although IT was initially skeptical because we were going outside of the ERP domain, which they were very, very familiar and comfortable with, we're very excited, about, the end result from this. It's key. It is important that you continue the training process. It's not a once and done sort of thing. It's constant communications. It's constantly, frequently asked questions. It's constantly little tips and tricks on how to use the product efficiently. That's going to allow you to get this thing deployed deep into the organization so that you're able to have the adoption that drives the compliance and drives the value going forward. Once again, a complete source pay implementation does not need to be a 2 or 3-year journey. What we're looking at right here at AmeriHealth was that from kickoff to full go live, it was done in 6 months. And that's 3,000 active users across 3,000 users, of which 900 are very, very active users. Thousands of contracts were loaded with the metadata applied. 7 billion spend was classified and analyzed as part of this whole process. And so those are pretty impressive metrics, and with a timeline that shows that if you have the right support and have the right focus and goals, you can achieve this sort of result in a relatively short period of time. So with that, I think I will hand it over to Richard.
Thanks, Greg. I think those are very revealing case studies, two very different businesses, as you pointed out, manufacturing in the case of Curtiss-Wright, healthcare in the case of AmeriHealth, but in terms of the approach, full source to pay, and certainly realizing the benefits of that integrated approach to source to pay. So in our final section here today, I wanted to sort of give a preview to what comes next, because we very much talked about what constitutes or is thought of as the core source to pay platform: spend analytics, sourcing, contract and supplier management, procure to pay. But what comes next for those that may have already completed the transformation or are looking ahead after that next step in the journey is done? They're looking to, once they've got their own house in order, so the sort of pay process is humming, so to speak, then they start to look at how do we create more of connective tissue, if you will, to other parts of the organization, get procurement more integrated with the business overall. So I want to highlight some of those aspects here. Study, for example, to kind of look at a variety of sort of in cross procurement, and the matrix here plots both the importance and the ability to execute. In some cases, they're much more equipped to handle these than others, and I've kind of circled here a variety of those that tend to be some of the more critical development areas to the business, but not yet realized in that many cases, and they tend to focus on this aspect of creating a more customer-centric procurement organization. How do we become more agile? How do we support enterprise-wide digital transformation initiatives? How do we, along the way, elevate the role of procurement to a trusted advisor to the business? So some of the questions I've listed here. So how does procurement get to be more responsive to stakeholders' needs? How does procurement keep up with the overall enterprise-wide digitization effort, and what are some of the emerging tools and techniques to help in this area? And I wanted to highlight one. So as the integrated FICA source-to-pay suite, you've got those core sourcing and procurement modules I mentioned, spend analytics, sourcing, contract, and supply management. But there's also one called request management, which is a really emerging space here. It's to provide in the business a portal to the procurement process, if you will. And the challenge that most organizations face today is when procurement is requested of them. The stakeholder reaches out in the business. It's usually through an email or a phone call. So there's no visibility or accountability in the process, both from the request standpoint as well as procurement standpoint. So request management is a module, if you will, I request, to provide structure to that unstructured process. So you have a variety of configurable forms and an approval workflow that says before request lands on procurement's desk or in their work queue, so to speak, it's been through this approval process. It's been triaged. So procurement knows they're working only on prioritized initiatives, approved initiatives. End user standpoint, for the first time, they've got visibility to the status of that requisition. And more, the value to procurement is that by getting structured form, that really spells out exactly what the requester wants, includes the, when they need it, what they need, what the specifications and attributes are, and so it's actually a front end to the execution phase. All that information flows through, regardless whether the request is, hey, procurement, I need help onboarding a supplier, or negotiating a contract, or conducting a sourcing event, a variety of use cases, but automation from the request through into the functional module where it's executed, in fact. So a quick case study from one of our customers here, in this case Porsche, that deployed the I request module as a front end to the full source to pay process. And what that's yielded for them is, again, much more visibility much more process integration, and flexibility. So they have conditional logic that depends on the nature of the request, the different levels of approval, in some cases 4 to 5 approvals. The other that they've done is identified those requests that involve an IT-related project or process, and that is off the IT security review that they need to conduct before onboarding a supplier that fits into that category, for example. So multiple procurement use cases. Probably the unintended benefit that they've realized, too, is that they've been able to use this process for non-procurement requests across the enterprise. So things like HR facilities, hotel facilities, HR, and IT. So, for example, great use case would be onboarding a new employee that needs a security badge, that needs an office, that needs a desk, that needs a laptop. All processes are enabled through request management as well. So the other area that many organizations are challenged with, again, this is from Hackett's Key Issues Studies, is very few feel that they're doing a particularly good job of measuring and kind of promoting procurement's value to the business. In fact, that's obviously a very important consideration. So again, we'll look at how can procurement utilize some new technologies and processes to be able to create the value more effectively, certainly across the C-suite and the entire enterprise. So here again, a quick example here. When it comes to savings management, being able to communicate the bottom line value that procurement is delivering. In fact, most organizations are trying to do this today. After all, that's sort of the reason for being, the raison d'etre for a procurement organization is to deliver savings to the organization. So as most are doing it through a variety of spreadsheets, don't consistent method for calculating savings, how we're going to deal with cost reduction versus cost avoidance, for allocating those savings across accounting periods, business units, and for getting finance approval. And that's where this breaks down for many organizations. Procurement can report savings they want, but at the end of the day, if finance doesn't acknowledge them, one would ask the question, are they real? Do they really exist? Another quick case study for you, in this case, another Zycus customer, Qualcomm, that's using tools within the suite, especially on the upstream processes, spend analytics, sourcing, those kinds of things, but no way to be able to bridge the gap between procurement and finance. And interestingly enough, when it came to the iSave initiative for Qualcomm, this was actually a CFO-sponsored project. So the finance function recognized the value and was willing to make the investment in budget and resources to bring it about, and some pretty dramatic benefits in their cases. So they've been able to instant this process across the enterprise, actually increasing the volume of savings projects that initiate and track upwards of 600, along the way of realizing incremental savings of between $40 and $50 million. And lots of users have adopted this system, and significantly not just procurement folks, but actually hundreds of financial analysts that are the ones that are setting in tool the calculation formula, the spend baseline, that are signing off on the savings projects through the approval workflow. And along the way, a dramatic productivity gain. So for category managers alone, they figured that they saved about 2 hours out of every 8 hours a day, not having to gather data, having all of the category project information and savings information at their fingertips. So 25% productivity gain for them. And along the way, getting that single version of the truth, one way to calculate global savings projects across the organization. And as with the case of iRequest that I just highlighted for Portia, it identified non-procurement applications for this tool as well. So when it comes to project ERP consolidation or M&A or sales and operations planning, cash flow forecasting, not necessarily procurement processes. The tool has been deployed to cover those on an enterprise-wide basis as well. So finally, I want to kind of look at some of these emerging and innovative, in some cases disruptive technologies. So here's some data from the group that looks at the current state of option for Internet of Things, robotic process automation, cognitive and AI, virtual assistants and chatbots, and blockchain. And in most cases, the current adoption is limited. From a mainstream technology standpoint, things like things actually being the most widely adopted currently. But across the board, when I look out over the next 2 to 3 years, these various new and disruptive technologies are forecasted to grow somewhere between 3 to 5x. And I wanted to share kind of Zycus's perspective. Certainly, part of our core DNA from our very inception has been artificial intelligence. And so AI been applied to spend analytics and spend classification as an example. And what you're starting to see from Zycus, and we'll see much more frequently, is propagating AI, because we think it has the big bang for the buck across these different technologies, at least a combination of AI and RPA. And kind of to close with this view, how AI drives the source-to-pay process. Certainly at the outset, spend analytics, and this all utilizes artificial intelligence not just to more accurately categorize and classify the spend transactions, but to serve up to the end user through a tool called spend mining suggestions that's based on our historical experience and commodity benchmarks across Zycus customers and across the market. These are the highest priority savings projects that you should consider work on. Once you initiate those projects, spend monitoring is a way to utilize, again, artificial intelligence in the system. Give me a series of alerts and notifications so that I can be much more preemptive and proactive, and instead of realizing well after the fact that something unintended has happened. So, for example, this monitor can ping me if there's an incidence of a non-compliant just going on, for example, so that I can remediate that immediately. It could also track for me different spend categories or contracts where I'm approaching volume rebates or discounts, for example, to make sure I'm capturing that value. The system utilizes that machine learning and AI capability to give me that information at my fingertips. As I do the process looking at source and contract management, for example, the Zycus suite now includes what we call Smart Assist suggestions. And again, expect to see more and more of this along the way, such that I have to be privy to the intelligence captured in my data in the system that says when I'm doing initiating a new sourcing project, this might suggest to me what's the best negotiation format that's yielded the best results in the past, or which suppliers should be included in that sourcing project. Like when it comes time to exit the contract, the machine learning can tell me, based on historical data and pattern recognition of that data, how long should the contracting cycle take, or perhaps what clauses need to be included in that particular contract given the profile of the category or the supplier, to make sure I've got the proper protections included in the contract that I ultimately execute. And of course, when we get into the operational phase of procurement, Greg's already mentioned guided buying. Use AI to steer the users relevant search terms, number one, making their process simpler. Number two, driving compliance by presenting them only with the approved contracted vendors and price for that item, and taking all the guesswork away from the buyer. So if the AI can apply the correct commodity code and GL code, users don't fumble with that. And based on my profile and who I am in the organization, the system is smart enough to know what the to and build to information, what my department code is, what the approval workflow is that my acquisition has to follow. And then ultimately, as regards supplier management and monitoring risk, let the system once again notify me of those incidences, looking at the stoplight metaphor example, certainly notify me immediately when performance is in the red zone, but on the yellow zone when it's an warning indicator so that I can take the appropriate action to preempt or mitigate potential adverse risk events. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I think we're really about out of time, but we were able to share this view of the Source to Pay suite, and that it is much more than just a simpler arm's length relationship with your technology provider. There's incremental value out there to be gained, and certainly the case studies that you've shared had highlighted that. So Greg, thanks today, and thanks for all of our customers for joining. Any final thoughts?
I think that we've the subject, I think, very, very, very well. There is a general tendency to think about deployment of source to pay technologies in phases and pieces, but the reality is that they all build upon each other, and they just, as you rightfully put it, the sum of the parts is much greater when you deploy the whole technology, and you do in such a mindset that it can be rapidly deployed as opposed to a multi-year journey. I think we can find that our customers will achieve significant savings and improve the visibility and the reputation, I think, of the procurement department along the way, and it's a real win-win for everybody.
Good. Thanks so much, Greg, and thanks to all of our customers for joining the webinar today, and we look forward to other future customer webinars on topics of interest to our client base.